Welcome to This Explainer. I'm Detective Rowan. Look, 20 years on the force, I've made dozens of arrests, and I've always had a firm belief that people only disappear for logical reasons. You know, money, fear, revenge, standard stuff. But the case file we are opening today, it completely defies all logic. This is the cold case of Hollow Street. It's an investigation that actually forced me into early retirement. It's an impossible puzzle, and honestly, I am still trying to piece it together. So, I've compiled the evidence, the forensics, and the history here to walk you through exactly what we found, and more importantly, what we couldn't explain.
So gather around, because this is going to sound a lot like a campfire story. Though I assure you, the evidence is horrifyingly real. Hollow Street, well, it was the kind of neighborhood where people moved specifically because nothing ever happened there. Tree-lined sidewalks, freshly cut lawns, kids riding bikes, the kind of place where residents literally forgot to lock their doors. But beneath that perfect veneer, the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, because on Hollow Street, people stopped telling their history entirely. Nobody wanted to admit what happened, and absolutely nobody wanted to remember the Thursday night the lights finally went out.
Let's dive into Act 1, the 917 anomalies. The perfect street goes dark.
At exactly 9:17 p.m. on a quiet Thursday, every single light on Hollow Street shut off. And I mean every light. Porch lights, living room windows, street lamps, all of it simultaneously plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. Now, this blackout lasted exactly 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Doesn't sound like a long time, right? But imagine holding your breath in total darkness for that long. There were no blown fuses, no explosions, no alarms tripping, and no screams. Just 3 minutes and 20 seconds of an eerie, suffocating silence. When the power inexplicably came back, everything seemed completely normal. Well, except for one house.
House number 14. It belonged to a 34-year-old school librarian named Emily Carter. When neighbors checked on her the next morning, she was just gone. We cataloged the forensics, and nothing made sense. No signs of a struggle. No broken windows. The front door was wide open. Her coffee was actually still warm, the TV was playing, and her phone was charging right there on the counter. The dining room clock was permanently stopped at 9:17 p.m. But the most terrifying piece of physical evidence we found, a single, wet, barefoot print right at the top of the stairs. Just one, not entering, not leaving, just a single footprint, as if someone had materialized right out of thin air.
I searched Emily's bedroom myself. It was perfectly clean. Actually, scratch that. It was almost too clean. But when I opened the door to her bedroom closet, man, the visceral shock hit me hard. Scrawled aggressively across the inside wall were these 3 words, "You didn't see." And it wasn't written in Emily's handwriting. It was a message left specifically for whoever came looking.
Now, every house on that street had a modern security system, but at 9:17 p.m., all the recordings failed entirely, the whole shebang, except for a cheap, low-quality side camera at house number 10. Let's break down the exact sequence of that footage. Step 1, the street lights vanish. Step 2, the feed turns to complete darkness and static. Step 3 is where it gets really chilling. For exactly 1 frame, the camera captures a tall, motionless, faceless figure standing right in the middle of the road. Then, step 4, normal power returns and the street is completely empty. Our text tried to enhance the image, but what froze my blood was a simple observation from a patrol officer. The ghostly figure wasn't facing Emily's house, it was looking directly into the camera lens.
So we start building profiles of the missing. 3 nights later, at exactly 9:17 p.m., it happened again. Another 3 minutes and 20 seconds of darkness, another open door, another missing person. This time, it was 46-year-old Daniel Reeves from house number 8, a librarian and an accountant. Different ages, completely different lives. We ran financial checks, phone records, social media, you name it. There was zero connection between Emily and Daniel. Absolutely nothing. That is, until I found a physical photograph hidden in Daniel's home.
It was an old neighborhood meeting photograph taken 6 months earlier. Emily was in it, and so was Daniel, along with 8 other neighbors. They were all smiling. Looked like a perfectly normal neighborhood block party. But as I stared at the photo, I noticed a weird visual glitch. Someone had been physically cropped out of the image. There was this unnatural missing space right between the neighbors. And when I interviewed the residents about who used to stand in that gap, nobody could remember. It was like the entire town was suffering from a collective, intentional amnesia.
Listen, when an entire street decides to forget, you really have to look at what they are trying so desperately to bury. An elderly resident finally set me straight. She whispered that I was asking all the wrong questions about the missing people. She said I needed to ask one specific question instead. What happened 6 months ago? And that question, it shifted my entire investigation from a simple missing persons case right into the dark territory of a massive generational cover-up. Which brings us to Act 2, Unearthing Maple Lane, the Buried Secret. I tracked down the town's maintenance logs. Turns out, 6 months earlier, a crew doing municipal pipework broke through a concrete barrier and found a sealed underground basement. There were no permits for this room, no records it ever existed. Inside, they found rotting furniture, decaying children's toys, and family photos where every single face had been violently scratched out with a blade. And covering every inch of the concrete walls, repeated frantically hundreds of times, was this warning: don't turn off the lights. So what did the town do? They quietly ordered the room resealed. No investigation was ever opened.
I managed to track down one of those terrified construction workers. He handed me an audio tape they recorded the day they breached the room. On the tape, you hear the men talking, the shifting of rubble, and then the audio just cuts to static. Through the white noise, a soft, whispering child's voice says perfectly clearly, "Now you remember me." The men on the tape immediately start screaming. But believe it or not, that wasn't even the worst part. The workers showed me physical Polaroid photographs they found scattered on the floor of that decades-old, sealed room. The photos were of the modern construction crew, standing in that very basement.
So to understand this, you really have to understand the town's geography. Hollow Street wasn't always called Hollow Street. Today, the modern residents are living in a sanitized, renamed reality, completely denying their past. But 40 years ago, this was Maple Lane. And Maple Lane was devastated by a massive house fire that destroyed the original property lines. Following that fire, official documents mysteriously vanished, and the survivors quietly rebranded the neighborhood to bury their trauma.
Mapping out the timeline of their guilt reveals the whole truth. 40 years ago, a neighborhood gathering on Maple Lane went horribly wrong. During a severe power outage, a fatal house fire claimed an entire family. For decades, the town kept the secret buried. But 6 months ago, when those construction crews unsealed that basement, they broke the seal on the town's repressed memory. And 1 week ago, the curse finally woke up, manifesting as those 9:17 p.m. blackouts. The past was literally attacking the present.
I pushed hard, and I finally got the few remaining original survivors to confess the sickening truth. 40 years ago, the kids were playing during a block party. As a cruel prank, they locked the 9-year-old girl in the basement. When the power unexpectedly failed, panic ensued, a fire broke out, and everyone just fled. They left her down there in the dark. To save themselves, they covered the whole thing up. That little girl was Alina Ward. Her body was never recovered. And her childhood home? It stood on the exact plot of land where Emily Carter's house number 14 sits today.
And now, Act 3, The Reckoning. The past bleeds through.
For the next blackout, we didn't take any chances. We evacuated the entire street. We locked down a 3-block radius. We brought in heavy-duty, military-grade generators and floodlights. We were ready. I stood right in the center of the street, clocking the time. 9:16, 9:17. Total failure. Every single generator died. Every flashlight burned out. But then, through the absolute darkness, I started hearing party music. The laughter of children from 40 years ago. As my eyes adjusted, the modern houses literally melted away, replaced by the vintage architecture of old Maple Lane. And standing there, right beneath a flickering, archaic street lamp, was a 9-year-old girl.
She didn't look like a monster, you know? She just looked like a child who had been left in the dark for 40 years. She looked right at me, smiled this deeply sad smile, and asked, "Do you remember now?" And then, bang! The modern lights violently snapped back on. The street was empty. My officers were screaming over the radios, because despite our total lockdown, 3 more people had vanished from the secure evacuation center. All 3 of them were direct descendants of the original Maple Lane townspeople.
The very next morning, I took a sledgehammer and I went back down into that sealed basement myself. Over in the corner of the room, there were fresh, modern Polaroid photographs pinned to the wall. Pictures of Emily, Daniel, and the 3 new victims. They were all sitting together in the dark, smiling, with their faces completely scratched out. And in the center of the room, there sat a circle of chairs. One of them was empty. Taped right to the back of it was a label with my name on it, and carved freshly into the floorboards beneath my chair was this message: "Some lights turn off late." That was a year ago. Today, Hollow Street is completely abandoned. The city quietly demolished the houses, and the land just sits there, empty. The case remains permanently unsolved. As for me, I retired from the force, packed my bags, and moved 1,000 miles away, to a new reality, a neighborhood that felt normal, safe, a place where children actually play in the sun, and the streetlights always work. For a long time, I refused to speak publicly about the case, until an investigative reporter finally cornered me on my front porch. She ran through all the facts, the missing bodies, the town's horrific history. At the very end, she looked at me and asked blank, "Do you think Emily Carter is still alive?" I looked right back at her and said no. She paused, waiting for me to elaborate, so I added, "But I don't think she's dead either." The reporter laughed, thinking I was just making some grim cop joke, but trust me, I wasn't laughing. To prove it, I pulled out a photograph I'd taken just the day before. It was a picture of my new, safe neighborhood. Kids playing, blue skies. But standing in the deep background, half hidden under the shadow of a streetlight, was Alana Ward, wearing the exact same dress, smiling the exact same smile. And written on the back of the photograph, in handwriting I had never seen before, were the words, "Thank you for remembering." Which leaves us with one final, terrifying thought to close this explainer. If a town's buried guilt can manifest a curse this powerful, how can you ever be sure that the street you live on doesn't have a history of its own?